All right, Sean, can you able to hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh my gosh. I have no idea what happened. That's my bad, everybody. But we're fixed. It's crazy because everybody was saying that they didn't see anything go live, and so I was like, I was asking a few other people, and I went on like the whole opening tirade and everything, and the music played. It showed that it was live, and I'm like, what is going on? And like, I tried to like pitch the ball to you a couple times. I'm like, I don't think he even like knows anything's going on.
Nah, you were gone on my end.
Oh my gosh, what a freaking what a clown show. That's my bad.
No worries, man. It
Yeah.
happens. It happens.
So welcome everybody, I guess, to the actual Sentinels of Liberty podcast episode for tonight. This is episode 40. I'm having Sean Kennedy on, obviously, as you can see this awesome individual here. And we're going to discuss a myriad of different topics, everything from decentralization to whatever the new Cold War 2.5 is going to be. And we're going to maybe talk about the Rand Paul Massey thing a little bit and kind of mull through some points on like perspective and a couple other things. So hopefully you guys and gals are going to like this. But without further ado, before I ramble on too much and just run my own podcast episode again, Sean, if you'd like to introduce yourself a little bit to everybody, let them know what's going on and
Yeah.
where they can find you and what you're up to. So
I'm Sean Kennedy. I'm the chair of the American Liberty Caucus. I also chair the Massachusetts State Affiliate for the Libertarian Party. I'm also an elected town councilor locally. I'm involved in a lot of different stuff, and that's how we kind of got together. And so I appreciate you having me on again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's a big pleasure, man. I always love getting your perspective on a bunch of different topics, and really just kind of talking about different issues and all the different things that either make our lives better or make our lives worse. And we know that there's a lot of those different things out there. Before we get too crazy, I am kind of curious. I don't know how much you've been watching, like the Massey and the Paul thing with the administration, how crazy all of that's been. But I figured we could start on a kind of an interesting domestic front as it pertains to that. And kind of what your thoughts are, because to me, I do think it's actually kind of, it's humorous, but not in a good way, to where you have so many of these people that, you know, they're going after like Paul and Massey, and they're saying, oh, you know, like they're like turncoats or they're traitors or whatever the case is. They're not MAGA, they're not America first. And a lot of people cite this rationale, right, of like, oh, well, like, they just don't do anything. And, you know, and it's like, okay, but like to some degree, like that's not a bad thing. It's not necessarily a detracting factor. And some of the things that they do is they try to cut the fat with the budget. They try to propose things that are going to be more beneficial versus just enlarging this government apparatus and so many other factors that come in with the government as far as control and regulation and so many other things. A great example of that is Thomas Massey did, or he's supporting something as it pertains to, you know, U.S. ranchers and the cattle industry and all of that. And so I'm really kind of curious to pick your brain on what your thoughts are on that and where is this all going to go? Because to me, it just seems like it's not really going to go anywhere. Both of them have a lot of support. But it is a dumpster fire, no?
Yeah, absolutely is. I think with Massey, he has a huge base, and he has base that reaches outside of his state. So when it comes to supporting him, he's getting out-of-state donors. He's getting what the average conservative MAGA person's going to get when it comes from like outside PAC support or national donations. Like, he has such a large base for people that just care about running things in line with the Constitution that, you know, we like, I've donated to him, I believe. If I haven't, I will, but I'm pretty sure I have. And the same thing with Rand. Like, when it came to COVID, you know, Rand, he's not like an immunologist, but he has been through medical school. He's at least
Yeah.
been in those rooms, learned, a lot of that material, and that just is general doctor practice knowledge. And he knows how the system operates, right? He's seen patients. He's not
Sure.
living and working in a classroom. So, the two of them bring different skill sets and knowledge. Rand was really big when COVID came in, dealing with Fauci. He still has been very vocal about it. And a lot of people haven't forgot about COVID as much as a lot of people wish they would. Yeah. Same with Massey. Massey was against this, the same things. Right. So what I think is going to happen with both of them is they're going to stay put, and, they're going to get donors. It's going to be embarrassing for Trump pushing someone who's kind of coming across, honestly, as a yes man for Trump, because that's what they're looking for. They're looking for that seat to just say yes. And, when it comes to like what legislation they're pushing, first, I don't want a busy government, because the busier they are, the more crap they shove down our throats. Right. And Massey did get the Epstein stuff off the ground. They got that legislation put in, and whenever they go back in session, they're going to have to address that legislation he put in, and they don't want to. Whatever their reasons are, whatever theories people have on it, they don't want to address it. And he has brought that front and center. So, I don't know. You can go in a lot of places with that. You can wonder whether or not the Democrats really want that released, whether Schumer really wants it released. Like, what's the play here on the CR and, the SNAP benefits and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, with those two, I don't really think they're going to go anywhere. They're going to keep doing their jobs, and they have a ton of support and appeal. And I really wish that we could get more people in there like them, because that's really what we need.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I agree with you. And it just, man, it is almost comedy that writes itself. Again, it's like a tragic comedy. When you have somebody that ran on the platform of, America First and MAGA and all of that. And you have, it's not just Trump, right? Like Trump he's always a bombastic, very vocal person. So it's kind of just to be expected that he always provides his opinion or says his opinion. But it is interesting how, it seems like him along with so many people within his administration are just like rolling against his own base. And on top of that, he's coming out along with so many others as well against Massey and Paul. But then you look at their people of choice of who they back, which for the life of me, I can't remember the guy that they're trying to pitch against Massey. Probably, like I said the last time, because he's not that significant to me. And apparently he wasn't that significant to do well the last time. But then it's like he turns around and he goes to like fundraise and support a guy like Lindsey Graham of all people. And it's, I could understand how some people might be like, dude, like, you're like, nobody's home anymore. Like, you are 100% just a turncoat yourself. And I can understand like the perspective of how some people would see that and how some people might take it when you look at like, okay, like a guy like Lindsey Graham, and the guy going against Massey, Ed Gallerin, I think is what David in the chat just put up. And it's like, you look at the track record of these guys and it's just abysmal, right? I mean, it does beg the question, like the Democrats really don't have anybody to put up either in like the presidential election or in many local elections, right? But then it's like the Republicans aren't even doing that much better. Like, they're all just trash. And it kind of makes you wonder what is even going on anymore? Is everything just imploding?
I think when you have the guy running against Massey meeting with Lindsey Graham, Lindsey Graham holds a lot of power.
Yes.
In the neocon wing of the Republican Party. He was pushing for all sorts of other woke initiatives that are not Republican as well. I believe they were pushing for, what was it, like some transgender stuff in Pakistan or somewhere in the Middle East or maybe Africa. He had a whole bunch of weird stuff that he was also trying to sign on.
Yeah.
And he his influence is bizarre because I've not spoken with anyone that actually likes the guy.
Yeah.
And for a while, Trump didn't like him either. And then he floats in and out of these spaces. I think whatever he has for influence is got to be pretty substantial.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to it with Massey in that congressional race, it's the voters, and those voters are not going to be Lindsey Graham supporters. They're not going to be neocon supporters. They're going to be actual American first people, which is supposedly what MAGA is. And they're going to support the stuff that Massey wants to support, like agriculture and less regulation on just simple stuff like, not pasteurized milk being mandated and homesteading, firearm rights. Like he's what his constituents want. And that's how the system is supposed to operate too, right? Like the system isn't supposed to be a top-down presidential or even the party necessarily selecting and handpicking each of those seats for who they want. It's supposed to be a people's vote within that congressional district. So, I do hope he wins. And if he loses, that's going to be an awfully interesting scenario that you've put forth, because now you basically are going to pack yes men in that are potentially just Trump favorites. And then where does that snowball in 2028? So it would get very interesting. I hope we don't go down that path.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't see that happening just because of how much support that, Massey has. And I think Paul's got a pretty good background of support too. They're pretty solid guys. It's amazing too, because when you look at a lot of arguments, they're like, oh, like how come, they didn't do this, like when Biden was there, they didn't do this or whatever the case is. And it's like, okay, but like, in the end of the day, like you have to go even beyond that, right? Because they're just trying to use this argument of like, oh, well, they went with it this one time. It's like, okay, but like if you look into it more, like they also advocated for this, and this. So they actually still kind of got something constructive out of it or tried to do something. So if it was something that was futile, they at least tried to put something into like a continuing resolution that was going to benefit the people. And I think that's what a lot of people don't fundamentally understand is like, it's not the fact that like either of these guys caved. It's the fact that they found an advantage that they could potentially use and they tried to take it. Right. And in this case, there's just this talking point out there to where it's just like, they're anti-conservative. They're not American, they're playing for the other team. It's like, there's not really any evidence, at least in my opinion, to where it's like you can support an overt statement. Look, devil's advocate here, like maybe there's something I haven't seen, but I've watched Massey for a long time and I've watched Paul for a long time. Are they perfect? No, nobody's perfect. But in the end of the day, their track records testify to what it is that they believe in. And I think a lot of people are really reaching at this point just to try and find something wrong that they can have as their like aha moment just to try and be right. And
no, absolutely. And I also think it's really important. And I think this gets overlooked on the right side of the aisle versus the left, because we know who the crazies are on the left, right? Because they're out there. They're basically socialist, communist sympathizers. They're progression without any end. Like we know who that they are and where that wing wants to go.
Sure.
The GOP doesn't quite have that dynamic. And in some ways, Paul and Massey are on the outskirts of the right Overton window in some ways. Like they are the ones basically holding back things from sliding in further into more spending. And maybe at a bare minimum it keeps the Republicans 10 years behind the Democrats instead of 5 years behind the Democrats when spending. But the Republicans really don't have a limit either on what they're willing to spend. So
sure. Yeah, 100%. And it's an interesting situation. I'm going to be really curious to see where it kind of ends up. I hope Massey and Paul retain their seats, but if not, like you said, like it's going to be very interesting to see what comes of that if they don't. And I can't really foresee anything being constructive or potentially useful if that does happen. If anything, it's probably going to melt down into just a giant vat of chaos. So that being said, and I think because we're talking about kind of more localized elections, right, or state elections, Mamdani, I think that's how you say the guy's name, right? Mamdani or Mandani or whatever. I've heard people kind of explain like why he's gotten so much support, and I think part of that is there is some degree of like curb appeal for the guy, to where he does know how to reach guys' hearts, or people's heartstrings, and he knows how to say a lot of the right things. If you can't necessarily take that away from the guy, even though I diametrically oppose the guy in practically everything he stands for, but it is interesting why, or at least like when you look at the guy, you look at his platform, and then you have all these people that are like, how is it that a communist or a professed communist or whatever it is can run? And it's like, well, like, let's take a moment to examine like some of the root causes as to why he's getting support. And then if you're not willing to do that, then it's kind of hard to ask the question of like how it is he got support to begin with. And that will this, I guess, kind of will probably go into something that'll follow this up. But I am curious of your opinion or your perspective on this situation too, because I 100% can empathize with people who think he has good ideas. But at the same time, like, I think anybody who studied communism or socialism or any type of ism within that category knows that it's idyllically bankrupt. Like it doesn't really amount to anything other than worsening conditions. So I'll lend the floor to you and let you kind of take it.
He's an interesting case for sure. I think he's an interesting case for the American experiment. He is a good orator. Those people tend to do well with communists. They also do well with fascism. Both, in my opinion, are left-leaning ideological views to begin with, because both are government control, authoritarian schemes, and redistribution of the taxpayers' wealth. It's a weird clash of events for decades now in New York. New York is obviously very Democrat run. The one time they got a Republican in, they actually cleaned up quite a bit of things there, at least made it a little bit safer. It wasn't perfect under Giuliani, but
sure.
When you have someone running in a city, and that city is heavily funded by government subsidies, and that individual is going to continue to push for free everything, free housing, free buses, they're going to vote for that because that's what they're used to. And since the system hasn't broken yet, they're going to support it. And one of the reasons why that system hasn't broken yet is a lot of it is Wall Street. Their commercial real estate is been headed under for quite a while. And one of the things they want to do, which isn't a bad idea in the private sector, but doing it in the public sector is completely wrong, is transforming some of these empty office spaces that are no longer required into housing. Sure. And that may work in the private sector, and it's probably doable with less government regulations to do that type of thing. But, you have a guy who is promising the world to a lot of people. He is has been very outspoken about his belief system.
Yes.
And it's not something that works in the long run. And what really props up New York is the stock exchange. And you don't need to live there anymore to have a hand in the New York Stock Exchange. You don't need to be there, working there, on the phones there, running around the office with tickets in your hand, buys and sells, and your puts in your options. So, it's a weird situation, and a lot of people that are very wealthy are going to leave because it's going to become increasingly unsafe. He has been anti-police. He has come out against that, and they've called him out on it because he's been basically just lying in his debates. And you can pull up everything now on the internet because everything's recorded. So he's just been lying about things to get elected, and part of me doesn't want to see New York fall that far. Part of me wants to see, New York kind of get what it has coming to them by wanting to go down this path. And it's going to be ugly. And it's not going to work out for the poor people that want the free stuff. And it's not going to work out for the millionaires and billionaires who want to continue to conduct business and have nice places to live and live in a city environment. So, I don't see it going well. But like, what's he running against? There's no the Republican opponent, has a solid history of groundwork and community activism, right? But outside of that, I don't really see much there. And Cuomo was just the governor during COVID. The guy killed everyone's grandparents and parents in nursing homes.
It's hard to escape that criticism,
and honestly, like, people have tried to get on him for the sexual abuse stuff, which I don't really know the ins and outs of. I've heard different variants of that.
Yeah.
But that stuff aside, which, by the way, should just eliminate a Democratic candidate because they're the ones that were all over that. Not that there wasn't some good that came out of it, but like most things, it really went way too far.
Absolutely.
But the guy killed people's grandparents and parents in nursing homes by locking them inside with people with a contagious virus that basically selected the elderly with compromised immune systems.
Yes.
Like what? How is that guy even on stage? How does he have more percentage than the Republican candidate? That is crazy.
Yeah, it is. It's a really wild dynamic. And, again, also, when you look at Mamdani and you look at some of the things that he talks about and just kind of going back to like the free buses and the healthcare issues and so many other facets that he's talking about, one of the things that I think we really have to ask is, okay, say you want to increase like wage, right? Okay, we're increasing wage in New York. It is interesting how if there's a conversation like that, most people like him will never actually have a cap. They're just like, oh, like we'll bring it up to 25. And then once 25 isn't enough, oh, we'll bring it up to 30. Or, oh, we'll bring it up to 35. There's not really a cap, right? They never talk about a cap. And in conjunction with that too, what they also never really try to address, and they it seems like they actively avoid it, is like, okay, so great, you have all these things that you want to do for free. Let's keep in mind that, when you look at the overall taxation, I think it's somewhere almost in like close to like the 45 or 50th percentile for New Yorkers. It's very high of pertaining to paychecks. And then if you look at, okay, you're going to have free buses, you're going to have this healthcare assistance that's not going to cost you anything. You're going to have, I don't know, like say, well, I know the other portion too was like the rent issue and how he wanted to try and alleviate or it was something along the lines of like getting away from like the rent payments or something I don't remember entirely, but it was something to that degree. And it's like, so how are you going to fund this? And then how are you going to justify funding it in a way that's going to be feasible to where it's not going to detract from somebody's their paycheck more, right? Because you're saying that it's going to be free, but then it's like when you're doing all of these services, it's going to take more of their paycheck. So yeah, you get free buses, but now that taxation goes up to 60% of your check. Now,
right?
Okay,
it's free.
Where I'm going with that. Yeah,
it's free for the people that are already on government subsidized everything. It's not free for the people that actually pay the bills. And the people that can move and the people that can afford to leave have the money to leave. And they will, if you tax them too much and too high, they will leave. Or some of them will know that eventually this will cycle out and they'll sweep in. They'll do what in my opinion, this is what is also happening in San Francisco, where you are running these economic hubs of the United States into the ground. You're making them unlivable for the average citizen. You're going to plummet the property, the the cost for the property, the real estate costs. You're gonna drop all this down, which is happening with commercial real estate already. And you're gonna have some very wealthy companies like BlackRock or somebody else, or Vanguard's
Right.
coming in. You're gonna come in and sweep up all this property in a prime location in a city that has a ton of infrastructure, but it's crumbling socially.
Right.
And
Exactly.
what do you do with that? So it's basically, it's not going to work. We all know it's not going to work. Even the Democrat on stage knows that it's not going to work.
Yeah.
And all we're doing is basically ending. I don't know. We're going to send New York into just a complete spiral. Honestly, though, it's a great test case because it's a massive city. It has a pile of money. And when it fails, it's going to be a lot less likely to be tried in another city like Chicago or
Yes.
Baltimore, or there's a ton of other places you could try this stuff out. Atlanta. I mean, it's not going to work. And it's so sad to watch because New York is a global, it's an international city. So
for sure. Yeah.
It's just sad. I mean, I was there a couple of years ago and it was absolutely disgusting.
So there's an interesting question by David, and I want to kind of bring this up because I can kind of see where he's going with this pertaining to, like, do you think that the free things should have a one-time limited amount of one time, like 6 months or so? And at least for me, I don't really think it would make that much of a difference because I think it would be such a I think regardless of the amount of time to have to fund or subsidize anything that's free, you're going to see it like in a very sharp contrast. At least that's my opinion, because once it gets enacted, and who knows, like in the end of the day, it might take 6 months to get there. So then you would just put on another 6 months after that. So either way, I don't think it makes that much of a difference. I think you're going to feel the negative impacts regardless of how much time, even for a limited amount of time or a limited scope. And I think the damage will be done at that point. What say you, Sean?
Yeah, I think we have a lot of well-intended social safety nets in this country, and they're all abused, all of them. We're seeing this right now with SNAP, right? We're seeing that people have been on generationally SNAP.
Yeah.
There are multiple generations of families on SNAP. And there's also the people who lose their job, someone gets sick, they fall on hard times, the people that it's meant for. It is not meant for generational abuse.
Right.
But what we have now with SNAP is you can't take it away from people because they won't vote for you. And as you initiate social welfare programs at any length of time for doing anything, you are going to get a subset of people who is now a captured voter base, which is basically the Democrat voter base. Is they are a captured welfare group, and people will not vote against their own self-best interest, and they will continue to vote for the next person that's going to give it back because it's going to be how you get elected, and you make that promise. And so, it kind of sounds like it's a bit of a slippery slope argument on my end, and I understand that, but I also think that you can point to historically the last 60 years and say any of these programs that sound good at the start don't end up working out very well. Do they help some people? Absolutely. They're not limiting enough. They're not harsh enough. And in other ways, they don't allow transition periods out of in a way that's functional. So there are some people trapped within the system. I've read those stories. I don't think they're a majority at all. But I don't think the government handouts are the other side of it is you have to go to the other voters who are struggling to pay their bills, who are going to work, and tell them, hey, you're going to pay for these people for 6 months to not have to pay for stuff. And that's just not something that we should be doing in our country. It's just not. What we're seeing with SNAP right now is, the people that are online right now saying they're going to go loot stores today, tomorrow, Monday, whatever. These are all able-bodied Americans who can go loot stores, right? So why aren't they working?
Exactly.
But the families that need food are going to go to their food banks. They're going to go to their churches. They're going to go to community services that are available. They have always existed, and they use those services.
Yeah.
But the people that are scamming the system are the ones that are going to go rob everything because they're not getting their check.
Right.
Or they're not getting their EBT card and they're not getting their extra money when they go and scam the system by charging some bullshit on an EBT card and get cash back from somebody. This stuff happens everywhere. It happened with the actual stamps. It happens now with the EBT cards. So, I would love to, from an empathetic standpoint, be like, yeah, people need help. And we do have a ridiculous amount of money. But the problem is that the government spends it on special interest projects. So there isn't anything there for the average American.
Right.
And the more stuff we fall into when it comes to social welfare programs, the more debt we take on. And at the end of the day, we're just chasing after this constant game of inflation and more welfare and buying votes. And it's a very large problem that is continuing to snowball. And, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in New York.
Yeah, no, I think you make a great point too. I think New York is going to be a very interesting petri dish in so much as what the results of something like this are going to be. I mean, I hate to say if Mamdani wins, I think there's probably a pretty good chance that he's going to win. And what that's going to be. And you kind of hope that some cities see what happens and they're like, ooh, like I don't know about that, like that's maybe not quite as optimal as we had initially thought. But I do think that the other caveat or the other side of that is you might have some cities like Minneapolis, St. Paul, you might have places in California, Colorado, wherever, and they're like, like I think we'll try it here. And we'll see how this goes here, even more so than the things that they've done already in so many of these different places, right? And at that point, it really, I think you'll start to see even more of a potential migration away from some of these states, more than we already have. And I think that's also going to create, we look at the second and third order of effects. And I think when you look at it in that scope and you see the migration that's happened from blue states to red states, it's not just simply the fact of people leaving. I don't think everybody that leaves those states are going to try and turn a red state blue, right? I think they genuinely just want a better quality of life. But I think you're going to see that migration go up the worse and worse these places are. And how those states, each of those states who have people come into them, are going to deal with that is going to be another whole set of problems that I don't think some places are ready to deal with, because it is a very real reality. So I think that the order of effects are going to be very interesting following that as well. So there's a lot that I think is going to be kind of on the table that's going to be worth watching and seeing how this all plays out. So
absolutely.
So kind of moving ahead here a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about the realm of perspective. And I know you and I have talked about this. I did an episode last week on perspective. And I think the important thing about perspective is, as I kind of mentioned, is a lot of people look at perspective or trying to understand a situation or people, why they do the things that they do, what their motivations are, et cetera, et cetera. And you see this lambasting of people who try to understand something or gain that perspective as like, oh, like you're a turncoat, you're a traitor, you're siding with the enemy. How dare you, like even try to understand it? There's nothing to understand, whatever the case is. And we can evaluate this as much domestically as we can in foreign ways, right? And how we deal with other nations, how we deal with other people. And I think perspective is a very important topic to go over, because it really kind of it formulates the way that we deal with people on a daily basis, but ultimately how we deal with people as a country. And if we're not allowing ourselves to generate perspective, to look at the reasonings or the root causes as to why people do the things that they do, I don't know if you remember it or if you've seen it, but there was I think it's called like the Bin Laden memo, where he basically wrote out like why he did the things it's like okay, like I think reading that would have been important in and around that time, because if somebody had actually taken an interest to understand why he did what he did, we may be in a different place. But unfortunately, when you have people that are in the positions they are, they're just like, like we just got to flatten it. You know, you had people talking about glassing the Middle East based on this. It's like, okay, well, over what? Like, you don't even fundamentally understand why you were there. And subsequently, we spent 20 years, you know, sending Americans to die in a place that really, like Douglas McGregor has said numerous times, like there was no real mission plan. There was no end game. There was no like course of action that was going to bring us any closer. And when you don't have a perspective of why people do things, whether you agree with them or not, it's very, very hard to even be diplomatic. It's very hard to settle quarrels in your own backyard. So, you know, I'd love to kind of pick your brain on that a little bit, and where you see things going if we continue just to go in this way of disregarding why people do things, disregarding the other side of the conversation, whatever. And I will say on a final point, like, I get it, like, there are just some things to where they're so clear and blatant, you kind of know. But on the other hand, there's a lot more that if you're not willing to try and like understand it, then how can you possibly resolve it, right?
Yeah, I think when you take we just talked about Ndami. So when you take somebody like that, right, and that mindset and essentially communism, you know, redistribution of wealth, we're going to remove the billionaire class.
Sure.
When you raise an entire few generations, we're probably from the boomers, at least through millennials, and now Gen Z is coming up. When you have all these generations that have been very isolated in a very protective Western world, there is no war here. There hasn't been here, right? It's always been somewhere else. So it doesn't affect anyone's daily lives. So our experience dealing with this is a lot different than, say, well, most of Europe, obviously, but say, you know, the Eastern Germans, who were not only in a war, but then taken over by a different ideological group and then freed from that. And we're seeing a split in that country where we have two very different worldviews and perspectives. And one is probably propagandized in a little bit of a different way than the other. And they both had to live through something pretty horrific. As people, citizens, as the common person. So for us, we don't have a lot of that perspective unless you've taken the time to try to look into those things. And we're very removed from the human condition and the reactions and the way things have always happened. Take a place like Afghanistan, they've been doing that for thousands of years. They're sheep herders, they're goat herders. They live out in the middle of nowhere. They have their religion. They want to be left alone. They don't want anybody to come in and impose anything on them. People have been doing it for hundreds of years. They're still there, doing their thing. So, you know, we have people that are more than willing. We have people in America now that are in a very bad situation, be it financially for a lot of reasons. They can't buy homes, they can't buy families, they can't have families. They're looking for an out. They're looking for a solution to this, and they're grabbing at something, and they don't see what had happened previously, you know, post World War II with communism, or the lead up to World War II. Honestly, they don't know what happened in China. This stuff doesn't get taught in our schools very well because, in my opinion, it kind of goes against what a lot of the educators actually believe in. So, you know, at the citizen level, there's a lack of education to find that perspective.
Sure. Yeah.
When it comes to supporting things, I don't think we're being told the truth. I don't think we were told the truth about Osama bin Laden, in the sense that, where he was, like, we knew where he was. We funded the guy at one point. You know, when we're seeing a repeat of this in Syria, we're funding an Al-Qaeda offshoot there. Now that guy's leading the charge in Syria. Suddenly he's the good guy now. So
Head chopper to good guy. Funny transition.
Right. And I think when you look at things that have gone over there specifically, the perspective that I always look at is, one, who's making money? Who is financially benefiting from this? and
Yes.
what plans have been in place in that region for a period of time where somebody is going to make a lot of money on this.
Sure.
So you can have multiple groups benefiting simultaneously when something happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things they've been looking at is an oil pipeline out of the Middle East, but you can't send that oil pipeline through the Middle East when you have, especially Syria. You can't pipe that up into Europe or to Turkey without having a clear path, without having to
Sure.
constantly defend this pipeline, and without having governments that are on board with having that pipeline go through. So you have
Right.
people that,
Yep.
very powerful, wealthy people with oil, and they want to make money. You
Mm-hmm.
have the military industrial complex that wants to make money. They make money off of blowing people up. So they're going to support that.
Sure.
And then you have people that are more global or geopolitical kind of power play people, where they're think tanks. They're trying to game plan as to where things are going to go and how we're going to turn things. And honestly, their biggest catastrophe was Iran. Iran was a first world country, barely free. If anyone hasn't seen pictures of Iran going back to the 60s and 70s, you should look, because it looks Western. And they have a fantastic culture, and they were completely taken over by Muslim extremists. So, and that was our fault, the CIA's fault, and missteps along the way there. So, I don't. You can try to take the perspective of the people in the Middle East that live there, and understand that if you live there, in an empire with a lot of power and geopolitical strength and control literally the world currency, was constantly coming into where you live and said, hey, you're going to listen to our rules or we're going to blow you up.
Right.
You probably wouldn't like them. You're probably not going to be too interested in going along with it, unless you're going to get something out of it that's going to help your family or something. So yeah, I think it's very hard for Americans in the West to put themselves in the shoes of the people in the Middle East. I think we do have some very strong cultural differences, especially in the religious side,
for sure,
with how we see our countries run and liberties and freedoms that we expect from as the populace of those countries, how we expect our governments to work. But yeah, I mean, as just a general overview, I feel like we have a lengthy time in the U.S. where things haven't been understood well, studied well, explained well in the education system. You mix that with people that take advantage of that and do what they did with, Afghanistan, Iraq for 20 years, Syria now. And it's very difficult to put yourself in the perspective of at least the people that live there, or take a step back and go, like, what are the power plays here? Who are the players within that system? What are they looking to do? And then once you look at that stuff, though, you can start to kind of call the next shot. And once you can call the next shot, you've got a problem, because now people are doing it intentionally. And
of course.
Syria for a lot of people was the next shot. So
and I think when you look at the realm of perspective, when you look at the realm of understanding, and whether it's domestic or whether it is in a foreign capacity, I think one of the biggest points to be made is also, if you're unwilling to at least evaluate, understand, whatever the case is, it does make it easier to dehumanize people and treat them as something that is would be considered subhuman. So you're taking away that human component. So therefore it becomes much easier to be able to do whatever you want to somebody else, do whatever you want to another group, do whatever you want to a nation, when you're just like, oh, well, they don't have ambitions, they don't have dreams, they don't have ideals, they don't have any of these things. And as soon as you wipe all of those different things out, the sky's kind of the limit to what you can do to different people at any given time. And I think that's where perspective and understanding is important. And again, I think people make a massive mistake when they say, like, oh, you're trying to understand the enemy, you're trying to do this, you're trying to do that, so like you must be sympathetic. It's like, no, I fundamentally want to understand the root causes, because if we don't need to be fighting each other, then let's try and solve this as amicably as we possibly can, right? We don't have to get more and more of our people killed, or we can. I know this is a big one here, Sean, but we could even avoid a war altogether by coming together and identifying the root causes. And you know, and I think that very much applies also when you're trying to fight this machine that we have in the United States that really lays hard on the political division, the sowing of division in this country, to where you have people that are just so diametrically opposed to each other. You have people that are just so overwhelmingly filled with disgust or hatred or whatever the case is, and they're not willing to see, like, hey, you know, like, why does my neighbor feel this way? You know, maybe there's certain things that occurred in their life that produces that end result. I mean, look, you know as well as I do, there are probably just some people that just maybe aren't the brightest bulbs on the tree, and their disposition does not make the best decisions. But I also think a big component is like, okay, like, get out of your homes, stop listening to Fox News or CNN or whatever it is that you subscribe to. And I would say this all the same. Like, I love listening to, you know, like, to Dave Smith, to Ron Paul, to so many other people, you know, Daniel Davis and Napolitano, because I get a lot out of it. But it's like, you got to take a break every once in a while, go outside, talk to your neighbors, and see them as real human beings, you know? And if you don't do that, it becomes a situation to where it becomes so much easier to just like categorize a people in a bracket and a label. And then again, you know, you look at some current events and you have a lot of people that are very convinced at what is happening in Gaza is genocide, right? Like, when you look at a lot of the different things, okay, well, what are some of the key factors that are involved in their, you know, decision on how they view that? Well, there's markers like not looking at their perspective, not trying to understand their situation. When you have the IDF that literally calls them animals, and you have people within the Israeli government that calls them animals or subhuman, like Ben-Gvir and many other people, yeah, like, that's kind of what that devolves into. And so, like, and that's a very extreme example, but the point is like, it does start from somewhere, right? And so we have to be kind of careful when we don't want to look at perspective and understanding where that potentially can lead to. Another example is also, you know, when you look at the Russia-Ukraine war, you know, you have the United States that perpetually sits there and it's like, well, you know, Russia's got to come to the table. They got to do this. They got to do that. It's like, well, they weren't the ones that walked away to begin with, you know, and then you keep coming back and asking for things that you know full well that they're never going to accept. So why don't you sit down and fundamentally actually listen to the reasons that they're there? And it's the same thing, you know, like, you have to look at the Ukrainian side, you have to look at the Russian side, and then you have to be able to sit down and reasonably assess this situation. But if you're not willing to do that, and you're not willing to get into some of the nuance of these conversations, then I don't know where you can go from that, you know?
Yeah, no, I definitely, I don't think I think that's just a good general practice for really anybody.
Yeah.
Who's trying to analyze the situation and look at different viewpoints, is trying to find the perspective
Right.
of everybody involved. And, you know, you can put yourself in the Israeli perspective, specifically in that scenario of, you know, you have these people that you feel like you've been backed into a corner. This is your country now, and people want to take that from you or kill you.
Yeah.
And on the Palestinian side, you had a state country that was given, your land was given away by another country to become partially another country. And that wasn't that long ago. There are people still alive, and there are definitely people that are the children of those people who own property and had lost their rights to their private property. So it's yeah, I don't want to go into that one too much, but it's definitely a problem. And when you're not either of them, right? Like, you got to figure out. And honestly, what I'm concerned about is what is really the best option for America, what benefits us.
100%.
And that's what we should be looking at. And the more we get involved in these things, the more we put on ourselves, the more we intertwine ourselves in the Middle East, the more stuff that comes back. And I mean, like you brought up in the very beginning, Osama bin Laden, like, you start getting involved in stuff in the Middle East, it eventually, in one way or another, you can't catch everything. Something will come back at some point over here.
Right.
And especially after the last 4 years of essentially open borders, I mean, we're prime for a number of countries
Yes.
to do something within our borders.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, without a doubt. And kind of moving a little bit ahead from this, because I think there's another good topic that we can kind of segue into here. But when I guess it kind of ties back into some of the other things we just talked about. But especially when you look at Mamdani and you look at the support that he's getting, and then it's like you look at the total contrast, which is like Paul and Massey, right? And when we look at the topic of decentralization, for instance, I think I think we have to start having more of an honest conversation about what that's going to look like, because I don't think it's going to be this I don't think you're going to have this broad general awakening by most people to where like, oh yeah, like that's a great idea. Like we're all just going to hop on board. I saw a post recently on X by KrisAnne Hall, and she was kind of explaining, how essentially kind of how that would look. And she's like, look, like if there was ever a time right now for the states to come back and start asserting their rights as they're supposed to do, it's the government is shut down. For you to just be like, you know what, like we're just gonna do our own thing, and we don't really care what you have to say. And obviously it's a very simplistic way of putting it, but she's like, look, like we have the initiative right now. We can start to do things while the federal government is shut down, and really take advantage of that. And I know that there's a lot of people that are, they're insanely like, just like, oh, the government shutdown's terrible. Like it's really like it's a Democrat ploy, but it's like, no, look, like I think there's a bigger discussion here. And I think KrisAnne Hall is right to where I do think like we have a very good opportunity anytime that the government shuts down. We keep getting these open doors of like, hey, like we should start to decentralize. We should start to get back to the 10th Amendment. We should start to have the states retain their control. And I know what some people are going to say. They're going to be like, well, the states can go horribly wrong too. Yes, they can. But I would rather deal with a state that's gone horribly wrong than deal with an entire country that I'm beholden to in my state that goes horribly wrong. Because at least to some degree within your state, there may be some working room. There may be something you can do. Versus trying to deal or tackle this entire federal apparatus that you're essentially beholden to at this juncture. And so, yes, I would gladly take the alternative. But I do think the topic of decentralization in a myriad of different ways, whether it's from regulations, whether it's from taking back in empowering your ranchers, your farmers, those especially the ranchers and the farmers, but also industry and so many other facets. You want to talk about creating jobs, you want to talk about bringing wealth back to your states, you want to talk about empowering people. This is a way forward. And you and I have talked a lot about local and state affairs and how powerful they can be. And I felt that this was a subject that you'd like to chime off on. So I'll leave it with you, brother.
I know we've kind of touched on it a little bit when it comes to the fabric of America's inception, when it comes to a decentralized network. And it was designed as a decentralized network in some senses, and the federal or centralized in others. And, what I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm going to offer kind of a different perspective on this, and
Please
I'm going to go back a little bit in time on this. So basically the way decentralization and centralization has worked throughout history is we have centralization through convenience.
Yes. Yep.
And we have decentralization through information and lack of control. So what I mean by that is you can go all the way back to the development of agriculture. Okay. Prior to that, everything was decentralized. Everyone grew or hunted or lived in their own spaces. But once you had a mass influx of agriculture, you then had a central point to grow food, give it to someone, They centralize that location. They distribute that food out, right?
Yeah. Yep.
That goes on for thousands of years. And then you end up with empires and a church structure. But the people who were able to still remain individuals in some sense were able to read, and knowledge is always power.
Sure.
And from there, when you have a decentralized system, and I think that this kind of goes against some at least libertarianist or conservative views, is you feel like there's less government in some ways, so you don't have a top-down surveillance state.
Right.
But when you live in smaller communities, you actually have less anonymity. Your personal relations are more scrutinized in ways that you don't have when you're able to isolate yourself in a home and take on a collective structure. So in our current scenario, we have the government looking to survey you and remove your anonymity that we have through technology right now. You're able to kind of isolate yourself and be alone, and you don't have that interpersonal stuff. And what we're doing and dealing with is more government surveillance. We need to find a way to break ourselves out of this. But we also have centralization, just like agriculture, which is going to be commerce, and to some degree as well as government. We right now have a large centralized network of tech, and that's where things are headed. We're headed into more and more tech. That is also centralized. There's data, there's information on everybody listening. There's data on us. We all are they're keeping track on everybody.
Right.
So where do you go from here? And there's a few places. One is the actual physical decentralization of the states, which is what you were talking about. So you pull more power away from the federal government. You take on more at the state level, which is more responsibility, which is a lot harder for a lot of people to do. They don't want to do that. They want someone to take care of them. They lack agency. They don't want to take that responsibility.
A nanny state mentality, if you will.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the longer that goes on, the more welfare you have, the more of these things that happen, the more dependent people are. They don't actually understand how to exist in a way that requires agency, self-responsibility for your own actions. So that's one part when it comes to the state apparatus structure. And the other part is going to be your finances, your banking. Those are also things that, while they come from private entities, they are affected by the state. But also you can essentially because there's a central control over the monetary supply, how we transact, bank accounts, things like that, you're still controlled in that way as well. So if we decentralize that in some way, whether it's a crypto thing, whether it's people honestly just having more banking system, more banking structure, more local credit unions, other ways to ensure people have money and capital.
Yes.
And then another way of this is also your legal contracts. And I think that we're moving this way with AI, where you're not going to necessarily need a government entity or a government sanctioned entity to deal with your legal contract.
Sure.
So you may need a government for enforcement procedure, which we currently have a system in place for. But when it comes to contracts and the way that we deal with each other, I don't think you're going to need that legal apparatus as much anymore. That will create some decentralization in the legal side, but decentralization of money and decentralization through tech. And the way to do it through the tech is just to have more of it. It's more support for smaller systems. It's not getting everybody wrapped up just in YouTube or Rumble, or you need different ones. That's how people got through the last 4 years of COVID, was having different people moving to different services and having actual to some extent free market competition. If I can't say it on your platform, can I say it on your platform?
Right.
And you need that because once it becomes a centralized apparatus, the government can take control of it, and then they have control over people's finances, people's jobs, and they also have control over societal stuff too as well. What you can say, that stuff permeates through culture. So I think moving towards decentralization is a good thing. I think that there's a natural ebb and flow through society over the years. going back thousands of years that this has taken place. I think the most recent one outside of the internet was just the invention of the printing press. You didn't rely on people to tell you information. You could go get it. And now we're reaching an odd point with AI and the internet where you're kind of not going to know what's true or what's not true. So how do we evolve from there? How do you evolve a skill set that allows you to look at material and run it through a series of ethics, morality, and say, this is right, this is wrong. So it could go in a number of ways from where we are right now, but I'd love to see people get just more active and try to push the envelope when it comes to local stuff, state stuff. And the federal government's going to do what it's going to do. But the more states that are acting as individual states the way they should and competing with other states, that's ultimately what we need. And we are very, very far away, unfortunately, from a lot of that taking place in a lot of the country.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And you had, pointed out something earlier as, to one of our previous topics where the realm of education, right, which was, and we were talking about perspective. And, in this instance, when it comes to decentralization, education is huge. And when I'm a huge history buff. I've talked to you about that, and I really like learning about a variety of different things. But I think when you evaluate the realm of decentralization, you have to kind of go back in history and be like, okay, in the United States, what was our structure? Well, a lot of people love to point out that, and I don't disagree with it, we're formed as a constitutional republic, not a democracy. And there's a variety of explanations and reasons as to how they came to that. I'm not going to, go through all that. I have a number of different episodes that talk about that almost ad nauseum. But what I will say is, in this structure, each state was supposed to have the sovereignty of essentially like Germany, France, Poland, all of these. It's a country, right? You have a conglomerate of country, or a federation of states, if you will, which is what it was considered, where all of these states have the independent ability to function and act and do the things that they need to do on their own, outside of a few basic things, which is like interstate and foreign, commerce as it pertains to like foreign entities and much larger mechanisms and stuff like that, which is where you get the federal government from, right? So there is this situation to where the federal government exists because it makes it simpler for each state to be able to go to and from and to deal at a much larger, more foreign scale than it would be for a small state to try and make 100 different deals, and then you just have absolute chaos.
Right. They're supposed to sort out interstate commerce.
Yes.
They're supposed to sort out having a military that can protect the citizens, and they're supposed to negotiate tariffs and global trading.
Yes,
that's basically it. It's not supposed
treaties
to be
and stuff. Yeah,
bullshit top-down laws after laws after laws that you force on the rest of the states.
Yes,
that wasn't the purpose of this. Yeah, the states were supposed to act almost as individual countries.
Yes,
under an umbrella of a larger military force, so you don't get invaded again.
Yeah, and it was, when you look at it and you look at the Constitution, it was essentially this agreement, this contract, right? Which is derived from the people to the states create the Constitution creates the federal government. That is the natural flow of how this was intended to work. And so when you look at that contract, when you look at what this is, and you look at how centralized things are, it's like, wait a minute. So if all of this stuff goes to the very center, which is, now the federal government, where do the people have a play in this? Where do the states have a play in this? Because of the people in the states, you essentially get the federal government. Without those two, the federal government doesn't exist, which is where this power structure really kind of flows. So the decentralization of these things will actually empower states. It will empower the people, but there are, as you said, necessary things that just you need to have something there to kind of help with the flow and the transmission of certain things. And the founders understood this. They weren't stupid guys. They didn't just decide to throw down a few pints of ale and just be like, this is good. Well, they kind of did, to be fair, but But at the same time, like when it came time to figure this stuff out, they're like, now, like there's just way too much going on here. We need to have a central hub. And so I think decentralization can be done in a very prudent manner, in a very proper manner, but you also have to have a couple things. You have to have the education, and you've got to have the appetite for it. If you have neither of those, one cannot necessarily exist without the other. So if you don't have either of those, it's going to be very difficult. But then you maintain in the same situation that you've been in. And when you start to give that power away, then you get kind of what we have today. And I would say that it's a dumpster fire. And there are some states that do better than others. But like you said, we're not quite there.
The states that do better, I mean, it's not difficult to see who's going to do better either. Like, this is the way it works everywhere. The coastal states and cities are going to do better. They have ports, they have hubs of travel.
Yeah,
that's always been the way that it's worked.
Right.
You're going to have less people living in places that don't have ports, aren't on the ocean, and their lifestyles are going to be different, which is fine. But you have large groups of people that congregate in high travel places or near the ocean, near where stuff comes in. And that's still how everything moves around the world. It's still being shipped everywhere. So, but I think what you keyed on, which is like education, and we also have centralized education in this country.
Yes, we do.
And as a prime example, right? When you have a centralized system of anything, if it's captured by an ideological view that is incongruent to like the country itself that it's in, you have a big problem.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
That's what we have. We have an education system that isn't a pro liberty, freedom, constitutional based education system. It's a bunch of, I mean, if you look at the Communist Manifesto and how many items are in there, I think it's in like the 40s or so. Could be wrong. It's been a little while since I looked at it. That's one of the goals of that. Now, whether or not that was implemented literally in a sense, my point for mentioning it is it is an outlined plan for taking over a society from the inside out. And when you look at the United States, it's not a country that's going to fall and fail from an outside entity coming here. It's not. It's designed specifically to prevent that, and that has been upheld. It's a country that'll eat itself from the inside out. And one of the ways you do that is you make those founding principles distasteful to the populace. And once you've captured a few generations of that, which is pretty much where we're at, you have a big problem. You have a big problem. And that's like New York's a prime example. Huge problem with this. And that's where it comes from. It comes from education and indoctrination. Indoctrination is never going to be, or propagandizing and indoctrinating your youth is never a neutral endeavor. There's no neutrality.
Right.
So if you recognize that there's no neutrality in this, you need to cultivate it in a way that continues on the existence of your society, your culture, family values, having children, maintaining a positive population growth trajectory. So we don't have that. That's gone. That's been gone for years now. And whatever we're doing these days is not only got us behind, but it's a complete failure at a very large scale. Absolutely. And there's so much money involved. It's not being corrected, but that's where I think it comes from.
Yeah. Well, and I think, just to kind of key off on one point here, especially as we consider this conversation, but really like the destruction of the family unit has been one of the biggest and I would say one of the most consequential death blows to the American society, to the principles, to the foundation of everything that we have, because the family was considered, and I think by many, like I can speak for myself, I don't want to speak for you, but I think it's still one of the most fundamental roots from where liberty comes from also, right? Like there's the core.
It is the foundation of civilization is the family unit.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
If you want to destroy any civilization, that's what you surgically disembowel the family unit in a way where it cannot recover from.
Yes.
And there are multiple ways you can do it. And if you, in my opinion, if you take a step back and you take a perspective as to, if I wanted to do that to somebody or a country, what would I do?
Yes.
Well, you take over the education system. You would remove any kind of faith-based system, and you would demonize faith, because it's a parallel structure to government control. You remove the mothers from staying at home, taking care of their kids. You not only remove it, you demonize
100%.
it, and you demonize raising your own children, so they go into a government system sooner.
Yep.
And then you basically become owned by your companies and the government. You don't raise your own children. You don't have any kind of ethical, moral structure. You have no back understanding because you're poorly educated in history, so you don't see it coming. And you demonize the people that are trying to maintain those values and subset at a social level. So once you capture all that, I mean, I don't want to blackpill anybody, but like, we're in a really, really tough spot.
No, I think it's a valid point though, Sean, and it's part of the reason why I brought it up, because it's like, look, I mean, if you want to start seeing where a huge downfall of American society came from, it really did start with the inception of destroying the nuclear family. It started with breaking the parents away from the children, taking the children, putting them in these schools, in demonizing parents who are just like, no, you know, I kind of want to raise my kid with these values, because then they turn around and they're like, oh, you know, like, oh my goodness, like, you're trying to brainwash your children, or you're trying to do this, or you're trying to do that. So in their argument, right, they use that argument only so that they can take your children, brainwash them against you, and basically get them to a point to where, as you've heard so much in historical references, either with like the Soviet Union or Mao's China, or even in instances, you know, with Nazi Germany, right, where you had these children that were squealing on their parents, right, because they were brought into these schools and these institutions where it's like, you serve this person, you do not serve your parents. And if people want to say that that's extreme, history tells us that like that was normal for some places, right? And then so, you know, yes, like breaking apart this human family structure and in destroying everything about it is one of the biggest turning points that the United States has ever had. And if you want to look at the realm of centralization, it's become a situation to where they're trying to centralize your family in a way that, and I may be butchering how I'm trying to say it, they're trying to centralize your family for their needs versus, you know, keeping your nuclear structure to where you have the ability to raise your children the way you want to be able to provide that moral guidance, to provide the principles, the foundation, all of these different things. And as a result, when you can pry children or these families apart, get the women out of the household, get the dads over here, nobody's seeing each other, you can then start to sow these seeds of chaos and, you know, utter destruction, right? Because now I apologize for being so long-winded, but some more byproducts from this is now you start to bring in more of like the hedonistic or the moral perspective to where, okay, the husband and wife are away, right? So now we're going to start isolating these two, and we're going to start putting out a bunch of this propaganda of like, well, this is how women are, or this is how all men are. Or, you know, if you're not getting this from your spouse, then like you can go find it somewhere else and nobody's going to blame you for it, you know? And so you start seeing so much of this other stuff. Whereas when you have a tight knit family, you're kind, to some degree, you have an insulation factor there. So I can't help but to really just drive this point home. And again, like, I may not be doing a good job of this, but it really, like, downfall in the collectivism really took root when you started destroying the family, and so many other things that came from that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's other components to that too, where
Yes.
we don't have large families anymore like we used to have,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of that is a financial component, and a lot of that was during the rise of feminism and birth control and things like that, keeping the family units smaller. And then nowadays you're kind of priced out of that to some degree.
Yeah.
So if you're not on state assistance, and you don't make more money by having more children, which is something that tends to lead to having more children when you don't have to pay for them. If you pay your own way, you pay your taxes, you're limited in other ways that I don't think get talked about as much.
Sure.
Just like transporting children, buying a vehicle that can transport five kids is just simply more expensive than your average car.
Right.
That changed actually a bit from the 70s and 80s, where it may not have been safer. I'll give them that. You're sitting in the back seat of your family's wagon, looking at the car behind you in the way back. But there's a few things that are other pressures that have taken place as well that have affected how people that are responsible people and the people that you actually want to procreate in a society from procreating at a higher rate than people that are that have a less economic pressure in the sense that they're getting the subsidies and things like that from procreating. There's no limit for them because they're not paying for it as much. Their quality of life is terrible, but the people that are responsible and make good decisions are actually having to be forced to have less children because they can't pay for that much daycare. They can't afford those cars.
Sure.
They can't afford that much college tuition if they want to send their kids to school and they want to pay for it.
Yeah.
So they're making responsible choices, but the way everything has been set up is not to promote more of those people having children. You have people on the poorer end of the economic spectrum having more children, outpacing people that are better off. And we haven't had any kind of rebalance there. And it's not just like poor and rich, it's poor and middle class. It's a shrinking middle class because the middle class isn't procreating fast enough.
Yeah.
And the more people you bring in from third world countries, they're going to also outpopulate, and they're not necessarily integrating at the same rate. So it's a very interesting problem. And one of the few places where a state apparatus could intervene is by promoting the middle class to actually grow.
Yes.
But that's just not happening.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that that it sheds a nice perspective on, where, you could get a really positive note out of all of this. But in the end of the day, if you don't have the appetite to do it, or if you don't, sometimes even if you have the appetite to do something, it doesn't always work out that way too, So again, it's bringing that perspective in the idea of like, well, just because you think it should be some way or you want it to be some way doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be the outcome. And so I think we have to be realistic in how all of these, modes of operation end up. And sometimes you just don't win, Sean. And so you just take that, you move down the road and you try and make the most of it. And now I do think where centralization, and hopefully this is a reasonable segue into moving forward a little bit, but where I think centralization has really been problematic is the warfare state. And I'm sure people are probably irritated about how much I've gone after the warfare state, and probably the last 2 months, I feel like almost every episode I've done has included it, but it's like so destructive, right? It's just, I can't express how destructive the warfare state is, how destructive the MIC is. And this kind of brings me to the next conversation, which is, people have talked about it a lot, but I think we're kind of on that threshold. I can't tell where we're at timeline wise. I think we're at Cold War 2.5, because now we have this thing to where apparently we're in a nuclear weapons race with Russia again. Take that for what you will. But at the same time, it's like, look at the rhetoric that has just been like spiraling out of control from Washington. And granted, I'll yield to this point, like, and I said this earlier, like Trump has a lot of bluster and he says a lot of things, and not all the things that he says comes true, but like, it's really dangerous when you have people like Graham, Rubio, who's the other guy? Waltz. I think the other guy is Waltz and Bessent, and so many other people that are really just like full bore. And I have to throw Hegseth in there too. And quite frankly, I think Hegseth is very much a his own situation too, but he certainly feeds it. But it's like I think a lot of people voted for Trump because they're like, oh, thank goodness, like we can pump the brakes on the wars. Like, this is something that I think a lot of people hoped that he was going to do, but it really only seems like if we go out of one, we're going to find another. And unfortunately, as it pertains to like Russia and Ukraine, we're only seeing this wild escalation in rhetoric. And I get that he flip-flops back and forth, and it depends on the day and it depends on the week, but it seems like every time he flips back to the, like, essentially the pro-war side, it becomes even worse. So, like, part of me is, I think this sets I think way ahead, and it kind of sets the tone for what the next administration is going to be beyond Trump. And how they're going to look back and how they're going to say, like, well, this rhetoric, like, not many people pushed back against us. Not many people really said anything outwardly about this. So it must have been acceptable, i.e. Lindsey Graham talking about Panama, talking about, other instances down in South America. And he's like, well, Bush did this and Reagan did this, and so nobody said anything about that. So it set the precedent. It's like, yeah, but that's not the point. Like simply because it did it does not make it legal. But you have people like Graham that they just run with it, So like, where does this lead us? Are we just, not to be alarmist or black-pilled or anything like that, but we have to have a conversation about the fact of, like, are we speed running at this point into just a path of desolation? I never had in my bingo card, Sean, and I don't know about you, but when I was growing up all these years into adulthood and to today, never would I have ever expected any rhetoric coming out that mirrored the Cold War weapons race. And here we are.
Yeah, I think the nuclear option as it relates to the Cold War, I do think we're past that. And the reason I say that is because it is not a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
You can cause too much unnecessary destruction with something like that, and too many people have them, too many countries have them, and once that stuff starts to kick off, that level of World War III that will take place is unknown. I do think we have a bit of a Cold War situation with, like, technology.
Yes.
I don't necessarily look at Russia as the primary opponent globally. I don't think their production is high enough to put them in that position. And I don't think they look at it that way, at least from my perspective. And I could be wrong. I think they do lots of things very well that would lead somebody to think that, they're the opponent, whether it's KGB infiltration into the United States. And I do think they're a player in a lot of that stuff. But China simply has enough tech and enough people to just throw at a problem that it's very hard to not look at that and go, they're there and they're waiting it out. And China, unlike the US, the US is specifically unique, even separate from Europe, where our time frame and understanding of things and the way that we project out the future is on a different time scale than
Yeah.
countries that have been around for hundreds of years, longer than us, thousands of years.
Right.
They look at it differently. Their game is a slow game, and eventually everything is cyclical and it falls, and their play is just to be in the right position at the right time to take
Yes.
that opportunity on, right? So Russia's involved in other places in the world and in Africa specifically. China is also involved in
Yeah.
Africa a lot. Africa is an enormous continent, tons of resources, extremely poor. And I just don't think it's a nuclear. I think you're looking at, like, the US should honestly be, if you're going to look at geopolitics, and this isn't a libertarian stance, but you look at what's available resources and how to help other countries and how to bring things in, maybe for the US population. Maybe that's one way to look at it, is what can the federal government do to better our lives by bringing things here. One way to do that is to make things cheaper, and one way to do that is to go to where the resources are, and Africa is absolutely loaded. And instead of promoting, I don't know, transgender stuff and LGBT stuff and
yeah,
leftist ideological views, like,
right.
And it's not just like promoting that as in, like, I'm not saying that I'm against that thing here as a freedom thing, as the government's not involved in people's personal lives.
Sure. Yeah.
But we're spending millions and millions of dollars to prop up things in other countries in the same way we've funneled money through NGOs in the United States to prop up things here and culturally. So instead of doing, like, the actual things that matter, which would be assisting in building ports so we can bring in things cheaper here to manufacture here, China's doing that. They're building ports all over the place and they're bringing things in. So Russia's doing similar stuff where they're empowering specific groups to have the in with the government to overthrow or combat uprising rebel groups, to stabilize countries, to then take resources out. We're not really doing a lot of that from what I can tell. So I don't know if it's nuclear. I do think it's weird, I guess, that Trump is testing nukes.
It's weird to say, right? Like,
it is. It is. There's also, you know, I don't know how much conspiracy stuff I want to get into, like crazy stuff, but we do have a weird phenomenon in this country where we have things appearing over our bases that no one can apparently explain.
Yeah.
And there's claims going as far as they've shut off nuclear launch things, components, what have you.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yep.
I don't. It's been going around for a little while now. And if I was in that position and I was the commander in chief of what is supposed to be a defensive military force,
right,
I'd want to know if my defenses worked. And if I'm being told by people, you know, like to take a more logical route that's not as inflammatory, like, I would actually like to know if, hey, if we launch, you know, this nuke at this island in the middle of nowhere where no one's going to die and it's not going to have any environmental impact except for this desolate island that nothing lives on, is that going to work? Because, like, if we need it another time, you know, if China does something, Russia does something, anybody does something, does our stuff work? And there's some interesting theories as to how aged things are, right? This happens with Russia too. They have their suitcase nukes. There's a lot of stuff that, a lot of claims that, like, Russia's nuclear armament system is so aged and old that they can't necessarily reproduce it. So I don't necessarily buy into the, I guess, Cold War 2.5 from where I sit. But it is weird to sit here in 2025 and be like, yeah, we're going to test nukes. That's weird.
It's just like, it's insanity, isn't it? I mean, it's weird. I never in my life, in the 32 years that I've been around, ever would have expected hearing something like that. You know, you always watched movies, you know, that always explored the idea, and you're just like, oh wow, like that must have been a wild time. Like, I've even had conversations with my parents and they remember, like, Duck and Cover, you know, and they remember all of these different things. And, you know, it's like, to have lived through probably, I would argue, still one of the most tumultuous times in human history where everybody had nukes pointing at each other, at least the ones who had them. It's like, wow, like what a time to have been alive. But at the same time, like, good thing that's not us. And then in 2025, it's, I don't want to necessarily say like we're at that point, but like we're not far from that point. And well, I don't necessarily, well, I shouldn't say, well, I don't necessarily believe that will be the case. I certainly hope that's not going to be the case. But at the same time, when you're even having, I've always said, like, there has to be some truth. The best lies always have some portion of truth in them, right? So even if it's outlandish, to me, the simple fact that you would even have somebody go forth and say, Trump being who he is, oh yeah, like we're going to start testing nuclear weapons again. It's like, that's kind of like alarming to some degree, it not because of the fact that I think we're going to be in an imminent nuclear war, but the fact that like, this is something that crossed the mind of a guy who's, at the head of the country, right? The person who is,
it crossed somebody's mind,
right? That's
whether or not it was him, right? Like there's a think tank somewhere that was like, hey, we haven't done this in a while, we should do this.
No, and that's the thing. And in knowing, kind of what about Trump, like, and I think we had talked about this before in one of our previous episodes together, but this idea of, it really does seem to be whoever bent his ear last typically has the largest amount of sway. I hope to the good Lord above that it wasn't Lindsey Graham of all people, to where he's like, hey, I'm here to tell you, Chief, what we need to do is we need to start revitalizing our nuclear program. Like, that was my best Lindsey Graham, I guess. But it's just like the way he talks, like, it's just like, I think we got to go and whip them, but we have to make sure that we have our nuclear arsenal up to par, and I hope it wasn't Lindsey Graham, but you never know at this point because he's promoting Lindsey Graham. So I think the instability, if it's not him, it's even more potentially alarming because there's somebody in the government that clearly is close enough to him to potentially sway the way that he's going to do something. Again, we might not be heading towards nuclear Armageddon, but it's still a problem because we're also talking about weapon systems that, like, as you mentioned, can decimate and change the very foundation of the world as we know it in ways that are anything but positive.
I mean, the two bombs that were dropped are nothing compared to stuff that's out there.
Oh, right.
Like, I don't think people really comprehend that. It's a very interesting exercise. There is a website, I don't remember the name of it, but you can like essentially mock different nuclear bombs blowing up in different parts of the world. And what was dropped was not as destructive as stuff that is available. So that's,
100%. Yeah.
It's definitely concerning.
It's crazy, man. And I hope that, going forward that we have people that are rational, that are reasonable. And that's a big ask. I really feel for the people that are supposed to be diplomats in our country, going forth and dealing with the broader international community and being like, hey, like maybe we should, step back from this a little bit. Maybe we should have a conversation. After all, it was the Russians that came forward to Donald Trump. I believe Putin was like, hey, we should maybe look at the START treaty again and maybe not go down this path, And so it's like, yeah, maybe not a bad idea. If you ask me, less nukes is better. But you mentioned the technological advancements and how that could be perceived as a different front. And I certainly do think that there is a different front there. Right. And so what does that bring to that realm, as it pertains to international conflicts? What are the things that we don't even know about yet that are potentially worse than a nuclear arsenal, and what is that going to look like? What are those treaties going to be looking like? Are we going to have a limiting factor? Because in the end of the day, we saw how nuclear proliferation occurred, and it's only a matter of time that the things that we have that people don't know about, and maybe people do know about it, there should be an expectation that other countries are going to have these weapon systems. And an example is, in the case of Iran, Iran, reportedly and supposedly did not. And I don't live in Iran. I don't know anything about Iran, but the evidence was heavy that they did not have a nuclear weapon or were not pursuing that. But now, after everything that happened, a lot of people have said now is the time for them to get it, because it is the one defensive thing that they could have to where it would potentially prevent something like that happening again. It's never a guarantee, right? But it does make a case for a lot of other countries, especially smaller ones, that are like, oh, like, if we don't want further conflicts, that is the one thing we could have. You look at North Korea. I'm not saying they're right, but we don't really do a lot of stuff to them anymore. Venezuela might learn that lesson.
No, I think the way that you go about it now is dependent on the societal structure in a country. So it's not the playing field is so drastic now that you're not gonna have this kind of trench warfare that we, have seen movies about since we were kids. That grandparents or great grandparents were dealing with that. I don't think we're going there.
Yeah.
Unless the country you're fighting, unless there's two countries that are lower with technological advancements are going to be there. But I think when it comes to like cultural knowledge, there's millions of people in this country that can't survive without electricity. They can't survive without clean water being delivered to their house. And those are the systems. If you're going to disrupt things and just want to eliminate a lot of people, you're going to do that, right? You're going to create chaos.
Yeah.
Anything you can do to another country without losing any of your own people is a positive, right?
Yeah.
And I think where you're going to go with that is, you're going to be looking at quantum computing and encryption. And if you can access another, and we had this happen actually in our state, that we had a very small town, had their water system hacked into from, I think it was China. Or it was the Eastern Europe country, possibly. Anyways, you had a local water system get hacked into. Well, how many people can you kill with that? If you can hack into a lot of them, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So then you get into encryption networks, and you get into how you deal with security,
right?
And I think what we're going to see in relation to that, as quantum computing gets more prevalent and accepted, and they're able to, commercialize it at some point later on down the line, but obviously the governments are going to have access to it first. You can hack into somebody's system from the other side of the planet and kill millions of people without doing anything else. That is a unbelievable amount of power. Yeah. And our systems are not equipped to deal with that because we take reactionary measures to everything. Right. We don't take proactive measures towards pretty much anything at this point. So until it happens, we're just waiting for it to take place. Right. And then when that kind of thing happens, then we're going to switch back into what we actually do with our nuclear arsenal, which is we're going to switch back to an analog system. Yes. So it won't be digitalized. It will be analog, and it will take a physical human being to move analog pieces to do something that would be so drastic to protect it. Yep. But then you get back into you need people for that. You can't have AI handling an analog system.
For sure. Yep.
But that's what we're going to move back towards. We do it currently with nuclear systems, but when it's going to go down to the local level, it's to protect everybody, because if you can't encrypt your local water system, your electricity, your gas power in the middle of winter, you can kill hundreds of people without anybody putting boots on, not traveling anywhere. It doesn't make a difference. So I think that's where if you're going to enter a cold war or a stalemate, it's going to be like, well, if you're going to disrupt our systems, we're going to disrupt your systems.
Oh, I totally agree.
But this isn't like a hiding under your desk in school problem. This is a high level problem that the average citizen it's probably not going to have any idea about until it pops up in sprinkles in the country a few times and they go, what's going on? But as of right now, it's not quite happening. And I think that people are more concerned about, and rightfully so, physical attacks on infrastructure. But the digital attacks are there, and they're always ongoing. I actually have a college in town that's doing cybersecurity stuff, and they have like this interactive running map of where attacks are taking place globally, and like the amount of attacks that are coming from Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and then China into the United States are just like, it's just constant. It's a constant flow.
Astronomical.
And if there's any encryption breakdown, we are in a lot of trouble. And I don't think people understand that how delicate that network and system is to keep a lot of Americans alive.
Right. No, I totally agree. And and I think that's it. It's kind of like our modern nuclear age, so to speak, question or problem that we face. And I know infrastructure and the grid and stuff like that has been a huge question for probably the past decade to a lot of people, really taking and examining, our infrastructure's absolutely terrible. It's absolutely decrepit. It's falling apart. And we're trying to integrate these systems into something that's broken or not as well composed. And like you said, like all it takes is just one mistake. And that's it. Like, and I do agree, like, if you can wage a war in a way that like you can do it essentially from your laptop, it like that in and of itself, I think is also infinitely more terrifying. And when you think about the idea of, let me step back. When you look at the drastic changes and adaptations that people may have to make because those resources aren't there, you're going to see situations in which humans are going to adapt in a way that I think is not going to be very appealing. I'll put it that way. And you're
going to revert back to power and problem solving. There's a lot of people that want to believe that there's some level of enlightenment that we're not going to reach that. And in some areas you may not, but in a lot of areas, I do believe that, might makes right. And people are going to solve solutions the way that humans have always solved solutions.
And I think if people think the faction issue is bad now, wait till you have 4 of them in your backyard and they're all trying to vie for power for a few square, miles. And you're stuck in the middle, and you whether people like it or not, it may come down to the fact that you may have to make a choice, and you might not like that choice, but it might be the group that's the most advantageous to keeping you and your family alive. And, and so the moral dilemma that I think people would have to face, and look, that's the reality. And I don't necessarily like the CDC, and I don't necessarily think that FEMA is hyper reputable, but there are certain things and studies that they have done. And they're like, look, the breakdown of society based off of figures and patterns and all of the research that we've done all looks this way. And, I think they said, it was X amount of, it was like a week before people in other countries, that had less than we did, were going into their neighbors' homes, killing their neighbors and stealing whatever food they had just to feed their own family.
It's only like 7 days without food.
It's crazy, right? And it's like, when you think about the fact that you can weaponize infrastructure, you can weaponize something like that. Yeah, like a nuke is terrible. And it's not to say that it may not come to that, because if you're a country that gets attacked like that, that might be existential enough for them to justify it, right? But there's so many other ways, man, that I don't think a lot of people have taken time to examine. And just to cheese on Dave Smith and our sponsor today, My Patriots. No, I'm just kidding. But it's seriously, I think there is some aspect of the prepper mindset that should kick in for some people before it gets that bad. But I don't want to drag this out too much longer. I really appreciate your time, man. And, I know that you have your own life. But if you want to provide any closing comments, I would love to have you do that. And then we can wrap it up here. I really appreciate the conversation tonight and all of the different areas that we could hit. So,
no, thanks for having me on again. As always, I have my title in there. If you want to check out anything liberty themed, speak with people that believe in personal liberty, freedom, private property rights, take a look at the American Liberty Caucus. That's our X handle. I have my personal X handle on there as well. You can reach out through either of those if you have any questions or interest. We have a Discord that we organize in. A lot of the work we do is backing political candidates and organizing within our states. And it's also a community-based thing. Lots of people have families, kids. We discuss local politics to music to all kinds of things. So it's a general hub. It's a good, positive space. We have a lot of great people in there. So I would highly recommend anyone check that out and at least look us up on X. You can shoot us a DM. We can get you an invite. And that's pretty much all I got, man. I appreciate you having me on again. It was a lot of fun. I'd love to dive into some of the other stuff a little bit more in detail next time I get on.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
So yeah, hopefully we can link up sooner than later.
Yeah, no, that would be great. I would love to have you back sooner than later because I feel like our discourse and our conversations, that even though they can go 100 different ways and do 100 different subjects, it's always a good time. And having some other perspective rather than just hearing me ramble about the Constitution or like the Founders' Warnings is kind of nice, despite the fact that I enjoy those segments. And I hope everybody does too. It's nice having somebody be able to feed something back to me. But if you got a couple minutes, I'll talk to you after the show here. I appreciate everybody coming out, watching the episode tonight. Hopefully you're able to get something out of the conversations. If you have your own thoughts, your opinions, whatever the case might be, throw it down in the comments. Even after the show, let us hear what your thoughts are and take some time and kind of air out your opinions because I really like to see what those opinions are, see the different perspectives and the nuance and all of that. And that's how we ultimately further, liberty. It's how we ultimately further, improving our own communities and our states and all of that. And it's not just an American thing. I would invite my friends from foreign lands to be able to provide their input and their insight too, because you guys have your own problems and liberty doesn't know borders. You all have the ability to fight the same in many ways as we do. So with that being said, thank you everybody for coming by the Sentinels of Liberty podcast tonight. Wow, tongue-tied. And I really, really look forward to seeing you all next week. There's going to be a couple changes coming up. I will announce that on next Thursday. But until then, take care. God bless. And it's great to see each and every one of you.